This is a unique occasion. Only the British with exceptional achievements have been honoured here in Westminster Abbey, where coronations and royal weddings have taken place over the past 700 years. Those in Poets' Corner, for instance. Chaucer over 500 years ago, and Shakespeare almost 300 years later. Others include Lord Byron, together with Lord Tennyson, great poets of the 19th and 20th centuries. The man to whom we pay homage died in Jamaica in 1973. Now, after 11 years, the peers of his profession come to pay their respects. Actor and playwright Robert Morley. Sir John Mills with his wife, authoress Mary Haley Bell. And Sir John Gielgud, who introduces and narrates our story. Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, arrives to unveil a memorial stone to him.
Lyricist, composer, singer, actor, director, wit. He was born into a middle-class English family and knighted by Queen Elizabeth at the age of 70 for his contribution to the English theatre. Tonight you are going to meet some of those who have shared his life and work and hear them talk to you about him. Some as world famous as himself, others who have been his lifelong friends and have helped him, as with his ever-generous nature he has always loved to help them throughout his long and brilliant career.
He's not only a great everything. He's not only a great gentleman. He's a very, very warm person. Very, very talented and warm.
It would be quite safe to say that almost anywhere in the world where they had knowledge of the theatre, and one mentioned the name Noel, one would know at once they meant Noel Coward. He must have got an absolutely, really, truly worldwide reputation.
I think if he hadn't been such a wonderful playwright, he would have been right in the forefront as a really hysterical acting. And it's only people who are hysterical that can play hysterical parts. He was absolutely wonderful.
The bitch would have me over here at high tide, so I should get up there looking like a bit of seaweed.
We only just worked with him very recently, about 3 years ago, in Sardinia, in a film called Boom, in which Noel played a part which was originally written for a lady, but was quickly transferred to accommodate Sir Noel. And he did it, of course, absolutely superbly. I was particularly fascinated to see what would happen when two major, staggering figures in my world of theatre and films would confront each other head-on in what turned out to be one of the major scenes of the picture. It was quite fascinating to see the particular kind of fencing that went on between these two dynamic characters. And it was a night shot, as I remember, when I wasn't working. And normally, of course, I would have stayed at home and read a book or slept the night through. But indeed, I was so fascinated that I stayed right through the night.
This party you had over from Capri last month went back to Capri, babbling about poor Sissi. They said they couldn't sleep here because you spent the whole night shouting over loudspeakers and pressing electric buzzers.
Capri has turned into a nest of vipers, and the sea is full of medusas, and the medusas are spawned by the witches, male and female, the kind that have little forked tongues in their mouths like lizards. Now, I shall tell you the truth, if you should care to hear. I am writing my memoirs over a very elaborate intercom system to my secretary, Miss Black. And that is the truth of the story.
He's a wonderful human being. He's kind, he's generous, he's a wonderful friend, he's loyal to old people in the theatre that one would think were completely forgotten. He never forgets an old character actress who's down on her luck. He remembers everything everybody's ever done in the theatre. He's one of the most generous and wonderful men that I know.
Noel's father, Arthur Sabin Coward, was a piano salesman. He also sang in the St. Albans Church Choir. And there, in 1890, he fell in love and married Violet Beach, a naval captain's daughter. Noel was born on December 16, 1899, at Teddington in Middlesex.
A suburb of London, through which the Thames flowed serenely, without paying the faintest attention. And from, I lived in Teddington till I was 5. We then moved to another suburb, Sutton in Surrey. And from there, we finally made London.
When he was 6, he was run over by a bicycle and suffered from concussion. His mother was inclined to spoil him, especially as he was obviously clever, and he always delighted to please her by showing off. By the time he was 9 years old, he had appeared in school concerts and taken some ballet classes. But as his parents shared a love of singing and amateur theatricals, his own interest lay more in that direction. He was anxious to join a school choir in Clapham, but his voice was not considered good enough. However, he did succeed at an audition for a fairy play, The Goldfish, in which a boy of the same age as Noel vividly remembers their first professional engagement together.
As a child, he was abominable. As the mother and father of a very famous young lady said to me lately, we love her very much, but oh, we dread her. We loved Noel very much in the early days of The Goldfish and of Peter Pan, in which he was very bad, I thought, even then. Critical faculty not being at its height at 12. We were about 12 when Peter Pan went on with the two of us in the cast, and he played slightly, and he was bad because he was far too intelligent for slightly. So when I first saw Noel, I said, what do you want to be? And he said, an actor, of course, don't you? So I said, I don't know. I don't rather like Mrs. Patrick Campbell. I don't know. And he said, then why are you here?
Noel has always acknowledged his debt to Charles Hawtrey, one of the most delightful comedians then in London, and also an extremely experienced director. Though at this time, Noel was inclined to be cheeky and rude, and often made himself unpopular.
We were children together, very naughty, precocious children. We were in a little play called Where the Rainbow Ends. And Noel used to come and have tea sometimes at my house. Well, my mother's house. I was only a child. And my mother used to say, if you ask that naughty little boy to tea ever again, I shall just turn him out of the house.
I didn't admire Noel so much because he was a rather fresh youth, a little frightening, with rather big ears and always a smart retort, which to a shy boy like myself was a little daunting.
Coward is the first to admit that when he was a boy, he was a brazen, odious little prodigy, much too pleased with himself and precocious to a degree. But he soon became aware of these faults and quickly learned to temper them with shrewdness, industry, and common sense, developing his talents unerringly with a growing economy of style in the lyrics, tunes, and plays which seemed to flow so easily from his industrious pen.
Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. Don't put your daughter on the stage. The profession is overcrowded and the struggle's pretty tough. And admitting the fact she's burning to act, that isn't quite enough. She has nice hands to give the wretched girl her due, but don't you think her butt is too developed for her age? I repeat, Mrs. Worthington, please, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage. Regarding your dear Mrs. Worthington, of Wednesday the 23rd. Although your baby may be keen on a stage career, how can I make it clear? This is not a good idea. For her to hope, dear Mrs. Worthington, is on the face of it absurd. Her personality is not in reality exciting enough, inviting enough for this particular sphere. Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington. Don't put your daughter on the stage. She's a bit of an ugly duckling, you must honestly confess, and the width of her seat would surely defeat her chances of success. It's a loud voice, and though it's not exactly flat, she'll need a little more than that to earn a living wage. On my knees, Mrs. Worthington, please, Mrs. Worthington, don't put your daughter on the stage.
Well, I started writing actually when I was 12. But I cannot say that what I wrote was very memorable. But then I got down to it seriously and thought I had a talent for writing, and wrote a play called The Rat Trap, which was highly sophisticated. Now, this was produced later. Meanwhile, Charles Hawtrey, who has always been kind to me because I'd worked for him when I was a little boy, offered me a part in a play called The Saving Grace, a leading part, which I played at the Garrick Theatre. And that was the real start of my name being known.
But his actor's career was temporarily brought to a standstill when a serious fall during army drill brought on concussion, and this developed into a brain tumor.
What happened about my army career was one long series of sad little disasters. First of all, I hated it. B, I hated making my bed out of boards. And having made my bed out of boards, I hated sleeping on them. Then, fortunately, really, for me, doubling back, one always doubles in the army, you know. Doubling back from a terrible parade, I caught my toe in a slat and fell flat on my face and got concussion. And so the next thing I knew was I was in the First London General Hospital with my mother weeping. A little bit overdoing it, she was, because she knew it wasn't really very serious. A very, very nice captain sent for me and said, "Do you think you are going to be of much use in the army?" And I said, "Well, frankly, no." And he said, "In that case, don't you think it would be a good idea if you were discharged?" And I said, "It's one of the best ideas I've ever heard." And I was discharged from the army.
By now they had moved to a more select quarter of London, Ebury Street, but the address was something of a facade to their still slender means.
My family moved to Ebury Street because my mother decided with extreme valiance to try her hand at running a lodging house, which she didn't care for. The lodgers seemed happy enough, but it was a hell of a hard job for her. So then when I went onto the stage, and I was so sick of watching Mother slaving herself to death, that I
borrowed a cottage from Athena Seiler in Dymchurch and popped Mother into that and popped my father into the lodging house, which he ran very, very well and was very, very popular. He was a convivial character, made jolly jokes.
And we had cottages in Dymchurch. And my mother was devoted to him, because Noel was wonderful with old ladies. She wasn't all that old even then, because, I mean, not as old as I am now. But they were tremendous pals, and she always said, that boy's going places.
Noel landed a contract with a music publisher, guaranteeing him money for 3 years, a most welcome aid to the support of his family.
Portrait suggested to me writing a play called I'll Leave It to You, which was a very light family comedy, and which he put on in Manchester with Miss Horniman. And that was a success in Manchester. It wasn't a success in London. I just played a straight juvenile. It was fairly dull, the whole thing. It ran 5 whole weeks.
Noel had had very good notices for the play, saying that it was very slight. There was not much plot, but the dialogue was very good. So I said to Noel, why don't you collaborate, Noel? I mean, after all, Edward Knobloch and Arnold Bennett, you know, collaborated. Noel said, well, Shaw's never collaborated. Barry never collaborated. Shakespeare never collaborated. I said, well, really, if you're setting yourself up to be a Shaw thing. And those are kind of arguments went on, I think, probably all our lives.
In an American farce, Polly with a Past, he acted with Claude Rains, C. Aubrey Smith, Edna Best, and Edith Evans.
I don't remember very much about the acting, either his or mine. But we walked home together, and I used to like that, because he talked to me. And he once told me he'd had something published. I thought that was terrific. Published, I mean, grown up and grand. And he had, too. And he started when he was about 17.
By the time he came of age, Noel was still poor and playing small parts in undistinguished plays. But he was brimful of talent, humor, and enthusiasm, and it was nearly time for him to burst on an astonished world as the wonder boy of the 20s.
Dance, 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 little lady, you this beat to the rhythm beating in your mind. Dance, 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 little lady, so obsessed with second best, no rest you'll ever find. Time and trouble, never, never wait. Let the cauldron bubble, justify your fate. Dance, 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 little lady, dance, 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 little lady. Leave tomorrow behind.
On his first visit to New York in the early 20s, he made a number of new friends, mostly in the theatre. Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne became his lifelong and devoted admirers and friends.
And I landed with £10 and no return ticket in the month of May, when all theatres closed. I have an impression that everybody would rush, snap up my plays. Of course, they all went away for their holidays. And so there I lived in a fortunately limp flat in Washington Square. And I lived for 6 months on really practically nothing. That is the only time in my life that I've ever virtually starved.
Back in London, as hard up as ever, he borrowed some money and mortgaged his piano. A new play of his, The Young Idea, inspired by Shaw's You Never Can Tell, was now put on with Herbert Marshall and Kate Cutler in the leading parts. André Charlot had become inclined to believe in Noel's abilities as a performer and now engaged him to star in London Calling, a revue in which he was to appear with Maisie Gay and Gertrude Lawrence. He was the author of the book, and as well he wrote the lyrics and the music, and his name went up in lights for the first time. During the run, he had written The Vortex, which was designed by Gladys Calthrop.
The script was sent to all sorts of managers, and they all said it was absolutely splendid, and they couldn't like it better. It was one of the best plays they'd ever read. But nobody would put it on if Noel played the lead. And as he'd written for himself to play the lead, he wasn't going to give way on that one. and there was pandemonium everywhere. Only one day, just by chance, he happened to be lunching with Michael Arlen, because the Green Hat had just made a smash hit, and told him about it, and said the whole thing was a ghastly mess. Because it was the Everyman Theatre, which was practically a sort of drill hall, you know, then. Michael said, how much do you want? And he said, oh, £200. And Michael wrote out a cheque for £250, never read the script, or asked anything about it or anything.
The play, which starred Noel and Lillian Braithwaite, opened on Noel's 25th birthday, 1924, and took the town by storm.
The first night was wonderful. That was all right. That went all right. After that, it was extremely uncomfortable and very cold, and there was no heating. And our relief when we finally moved into the West End of the Royalty Theatre was something. We could hardly believe that we weren't shuddering. I used to watch poor Lillian's hands shaking with cold.
I don't think any of you realize what Noel Coward meant to us, the audience, the young people, when he burst upon the world in 1924 with The Vortex. It horrified our parents, and for us young people, it was revelation. Noel Coward was the Beatles of our day. Do you realize that up till then, nobody had ever called somebody else darling unless they were having a love affair with them? And the fact of everybody being so sophisticated and call each other darling, that started this habit, which has gone on till today. We went to the Everyman, and our parents forbade us to. A young man taking dope, his mother having an affair with one of his friends. I mean, this was absolutely horrifying. But to us, it was revelation.
The most hilarious thing that happened to me in the Vortex was after we played the London run, we opened in Washington. And Lillian, at one great moment in the last act, used to take the box of drugs from my hand and throw it with tremendous vehemence, saying, Nicky, Nicky. She threw it out of the window, and a stagehand happened to be passing, and threw it back, and she caught it. She had her hands in their position still, and she gave it one look, and threw it back with such venom that it broke the edge of the window. And then the audience broke up, and again the curtain had to come down. We had to start the act again.
The Vortex brought him the kind of success he'd always longed for. The material things, money, new clothes, his dressing gowns became much photographed and talked about, a fine new car, friends, and also some of the responsibilities and penalties of fame.
The thing of sitting up in bed with the cigarette holder was unfortunate, because I had Chinese pajamas and a cigarette, and they insisted. I said, listen, photographs in bed for the birds, let's not worry about that. They said, no, this is very effective. And they took it. And as the flash went, my eyes shut. And so the result was I looked like an advanced Chinese decadent in the last phases of dope. That was published all over the world.
Still, he was determined to go on working hard and to live up to the glamorous image of his originality and youthful achievements. Punctual, polite, precise, and elegant, he became as popular and as much talked about as the Prince of Wales was at that time, and vied with him in setting the fashion for men's clothes. He was often to be seen dancing at the Embassy Club in Bond Street with Gertrude Lawrence, and he would be invited to all the smart parties, where he would sing his own songs and deliver his witty comments with untiring charm and zest, although still working diligently at his acting in the theatre, as well as writing and composing in the daytime. During the run of the Vortex, he left the company for a few performances to see the Manchester opening of his own first great review of Charles B. Cochrane, On With the Dance. I had been acting in a small repertory company in Oxford at the time, and because I played the piano a little, I was released from that company to understudy Coward in London. And while he was away, and subsequently when he went to America, I played the part for several weeks. But stepping into somebody else's shoes in a big success is rather a nerve-wracking experience. And I found myself copying many of his mannerisms and his style of speaking, and all this made it rather difficult for me later to find my own way of acting. All the same, it certainly gave me my first big chance in the West End of London.
On With the Dance included one of Noel's most successful tunes.
Poor little rich girl, you're a bewitched girl, better take care. Laughing and danger, virtuous stranger, better beware. For life you lead, that's all your nerves are jangle. Your love affairs are in a hopeless tangle. Though you're a child, dear, your life's a wild typhoon.
By 1928, Noel had 3 plays running simultaneously in the West End, as well as the Cochrane Revue. The leading part in Hay Fever was created by Mary Tempest, and Noel himself produced the play, understandably nervous to find himself at the age of 25 showing Mary Tempest how to act. Tallulah Bankhead and Edna Best appeared in Fallen Angels at the Globe Theatre, whilst Noel sailed to New York to appear in The Vortex on Broadway, where it ran for 5 months. But now he was to meet failure and unpopularity. A new management of the Hampstead Theatre presented The Rat Trap, but this closed after only 12 performances. And Home Chat at the Duke of York's and Sirocco, in which Ivan Novello starred as Daly's, fared no better. Noel was actually hissed at the opening of Sirocco, and infuriated fans spat at him as he left the theatre. His luck for the moment was badly out.
I rang up a friend in the country, and I said, isn't it exciting? I've been asked to play with Noel Coward in London. He said, oh, you can't possibly do that. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, haven't you heard? I said, no, I've been away. What do I have to hear? Well, he'd written a play called Sirocco. It was booed off the stage. There were catcalls and hisses and pandemonium, and Ivan Novello was playing the lead, and Zina now. Really, think about it. And I think it's a great mistake to play with Noel Coward. Well, I took no notice of all. They don't know what they're talking about anyhow. I go up to London, and we have the first rehearsal. Noel has got a part as long as Hamlet. He arrives at the first rehearsal, word perfect. This is shattering. Well, I struggled for about 2 or 3 days, and then I began to cry. I never stopped crying at all. Here was I, supposed to be a very wealthy, sophisticated woman, Noel's mistress. And here was just a tear-stained drab every time he looked at me, which was really rather trying for him. However, he called me over and he said, now look, Zina, you can't go on like this. After all, if you were working for the post office, you couldn't behave like this, could you?
Noel first developed his clipped manner of speaking in an effort to combat his mother's deafness, from which she had suffered ever since she fell out of a porthole in Madeira, landing on her head. This episode, worthy of a typical Coward lyric, was never joked about by her devoted son, but he did admit that despite his efforts, she never managed to lip-read what he was saying in all her 91 years. When he was offered the part of Lewis Dodd in The Constant Nymph, he realized that he must try to suppress his characteristic mannerisms of speech for the first time. And with the help of Basil Dean, who directed the play, he succeeded in giving a character performance of far greater variety and depth than he'd ever attempted since The Vortex. And even Hannon Swaffer, a dreaded and virulent theatre critic of the day, was moved to write, there has been in our memory no stage personality who has achieved so much success in so many branches of his art as this youth of 26.
Oh, his Lewis Dodd was beautiful. It was perfection. It was the part that she had written. John gave a lovely performance of it, but there was the streak of cruelty that was in Noel, which was so awfully valuable in that in spite of his sympathy and his lovingness and his adorableness, you felt that slight jab that Noel always had.
In The Constant Nymph, that was when Tessa was dying. And Edna looked quite frail, but she weighed a ton. And I used to stagger across the stage with her and put her on the bed to die. And then go to the window very sadly and throw it out. And the last line of the play was, Tessa's got away. She's safe. She's dead. Well, one night the strap of the window broke, and the window came down on my fingers. And so I said, Tessa's got away. She's safe. She's Al. Whereupon Tessa, who was dead, jumped 3 feet into the air, and the curtain fell and it roared out. Which wasn't quite the idea at the end of the play.
But the result of 5 years' hard work now caught up with him. He's always been a perfectionist and inclined to drive himself too hard. And now he paid with a nervous breakdown and was obliged to leave the cast under doctor's orders. I was again his understudy and took over his part for the rest of the long run in London, while Noel went to America, and there, whilst convalescing in Virginia, wrote a new play, The Marquise, as he had promised, for Mary Tempest to star in London. Still not well, he was ordered to take a sea voyage to recuperate. The boat stopped at Honolulu, and there, cooped up in his room with a view of the beach, he composed one of his most successful songs.
And it comes in very handy if I'm doing any cabaret performances. Because, you know, it's now so well known that as I start the first bars, people applaud, and that gets me through to the end, if I'm quick.
A room without you and you, and no one to carry us, no one to hurry us through this dream we found. We'll gaze at the sky and try to get what it's all about, then we will figure out why the world is round. We'll be as happy and contented as birds upon a tree, high above the mountains and sea. We'll build and we'll do, and sorrow will never come, or will it ever come to a room without you.
I had met Noel in connection with this year of grace because he was always so kind to all the girls. You know, we were the Cochrane young ladies. He was always encouraging and helpful. And there was a marvelous day when we were in this great bare rehearsal room at Poland Street when the numbers were first being tried out. And Sonny Hale was to sing Dance Little Lady. Now, Dance Little Lady at that time was such a new rhythm, and he really didn't know what to make of it. We were the girls and the boys dancing as robots in the background with Sonny singing this number. And he sort of was despairing, and Noel Coward, a very young Noel Coward, was sitting there. One could see he was getting rather agitated because it wasn't going the way he wanted it. And Sonny said, you know, I don't know what to do with this now. And he said, well, let me show you, dear boy, let me show you. And up he got, and the vitality, the magnetism, when he went into this, to us then, a very, very new rhythm.
He began writing Bittersweet on his return to London and completed this new operetta a little later when he was in New York. It became a huge success and gave him more satisfaction than any other musical he's ever written. Productions broke records in London and New York, performances were given in countries all through the world, and recordings sold endlessly in the years to come. He wrote the great song I'll See You Again in 20 minutes while his taxi was caught in a traffic jam.
I'll see you again whenever spring breaks through again. Time may lie heavy between, but what has been is past forgetting. Sweet memory across the years, come to me. If my birthday goes on, in my heart will ever lie just the echo of a song.
The book part of it took 10 days. The score, I had some of the tunes in my head,
And on the whole, I would say the complete show was ready to go into rehearsal within about 5 months.
I was with him on the first night of Bittersweet at His Majesty's in 28. It was obviously a classic. I think as the years go on, the music becomes more important. But he was very apprehensive. He said, "Herbert, I want you to tell me one thing. This is the best thing I've done ever, isn't it?" So I said, "Yes, of course it is." No, very, very good. He said, "I want you to tell me that because this is going to take care of the whole of my family for as long as they live."
Leaving New York after the American triumph of Bittersweet, Noel took a 6-month trip to Japan, Korea, and Shanghai for a well-deserved rest.
Gertie Lawrence had given me a most beautiful Cartier picture frame with a photograph of her on one side and another photograph of her on the other side, so as to remind me that I promised to write a play for her. And when I was getting ready over my flu, there was nothing much to do. So I wrote Private Lives in 4 days. And not one word was changed.
This was the first play to be presented in this very theatre, the Phoenix, where it opened in 1930 and was a huge success, as it has been ever since. One could quote so many of its very best lines, such as, "Women should be struck regularly, like gongs."
What have you been doing lately, during these last years?
I went around the world, you know, after...
Yes, of course I know. How was it?
The world?
Yes.
Very enjoyable.
China must be very interesting.
Very big, China.
And Japan?
Very small.
Did you eat shark fins and take your shoes off and use chopsticks and everything?
Practically everything.
And India? The burning gars or gases or whatever they are, and the Taj Mahal. How was the Taj Mahal?
Unbelievable. A sort of dream.
That was the moonlight, I expect. Of course, you saw it in the moonlight.
Yes. Moonlight can be cruelly deceptive.
And it didn't look like a biscuit box, did it? You know, I've always thought that it might.
Darling, I do love you so.
I do hope you met a sacred elephant. There's in point, I believe. It's very, very sweet.
I've never loved anybody else for an instant.
Trust me.
And you love me too, don't you? There isn't any doubt about it anywhere, is there?
No. No doubt anywhere.
You're looking very lovely in this damned moonlight, Amanda. Your skin is clear and cool, and your eyes are shining. And you're growing lovelier and lovelier every second as I look at you. You don't hold any mystery for me, darling. Do you mind? There isn't a particle of you that I don't know, remember, and want.
I'm glad, my sweet.
More than any desire in the world, deep down in my deepest heart, I want you back again. Please.
Well, being in the production of Private Lives was one of the most lovely experiences that any actress could ever have, working with Larry and Noel and Gertie. It was absolutely thrilling. And Noel's consideration for Larry and I, who were playing the small part, was so loving and dear, he made us feel as important as he and Gertie, and of course enabled us to give better performances.
During Noel and Gertie Lawrence's Broadway run of Private Lives, Noel completed Cavalcade, a musical and historical pageant play in 22 scenes, which used every facility the famous Drury Lane Theatre in London had to offer. But the first night almost ended in disaster.
On the first night, there was a scene when the troop ship had to go away. We did this by moving, that had moving platforms. And another platform slid on for the other scene. But owing to the enthusiasm of the company and the nervousness, the crowd waiting got onto the under platform too soon, which made the other one stick.
About halfway through the show, I hadn't made my entrance, and I heard all hell breaking loose on the stage, and nipped into the prompt corner, and the lifts had jammed about 18 feet up.
Finally, Jack Wilson came back into the box and said, "Danny says it might take a few minutes or 2 hours." Thank you very much.
I looked through the curtains. The audience seemed quite happy, almost oblivious of what was going on, and then I looked up at the stage box, and the author was sitting there with a long white cigarette holder held perfectly steadily in his hands, with a very, very charming, relaxed smile on his face. And I looked a little closer, and I saw small beads of perspiration dripping off his chin, because he knew that it could have been the end of the evening, and which would have been, you know, absolute chaos. As it was, I think it was about 2.5 minutes. They started working again, and the show went on and finished in a blaze of glory, and I think it was the most, well, I know it was the most exciting evening, first night in the theatre that I've ever been anything to do with. Words and Music was a wonderful show to be in, and at that time I was a song and dance man, and I did a number in it called Something to Do with Spring, with Joyce Barber. And just to show how the censorship has altered, there was one line, the last line in the lyric, which I remember went, "I'd like to know what that stallion thinks. Maybe it's something to do with spring." And it was so utterly disgusting that we had to cut it out on the second night.
Words and Music was almost a very, very good review, but it wasn't quite. I've never quite made up my mind why. Could possibly have been my fault.
Most of his spare time was spent down at his farm, Goldenhurst, in Kent, and there he entertained innumerable weekend guests. To be asked to Goldenhurst was like being summoned to a royal garden party. It was certainly one of the most sought-after invitations in the theatrical calendar.
You were there, I saw you and my heart started beating. You were there, and in that first enchanted meeting, life changed its tune, the stars, the moon came near to me. Dreams that I dreamed like magic seemed to be clear to me, dear to me. Your eyes looked into mine and faltered everywhere. The color of the whole world altered, hopes became true. My universe tumbled into, the earth became heaven for you. Were there.
He now returned to New York to direct and act in his new play, Designed for Living, which had star parts for himself, Lynn Fontanne, and Alfred Lunt.
We'd been playing it for some months, and one night, Alfred said my line instead of his own in the drunk scene. And so we changed parts, and we had a lovely time. Never missed a laugh. We came off, and Lynn was waiting in the wings, in a fury. And she said, nothing either of you did in that scene was even remotely amusing. And walked into a dressing room and slammed the door. So Alfred and I went to a movie. It was a matinee. We went to a movie in order to forget our grief.
On an earlier trip to France, he had visited the enchanting Yvonne Printemps, for whom he agreed to write a musical play. This was entitled Conversation Piece, and was presented by Charles B. Cochrane at His Majesty's Theatre in London in February 1934, with Noel himself, Printemps, Heather Thatcher, Louis Hayward, Irene Brown, and George Sanders, who played one of the Regency rakes. This was, in fact, his last production under the Cochrane banner, for Noel had decided to go into management with Jack Wilson as his partner. Together, they presented Noel's next new play, Point Verlaine. This was played by the Lunts on Broadway, but without much success.
Still in New York, he agreed to play in his first film for 17 years, The Scoundrel.
He returned to England in the summer of 1935 to become chairman of the Actors' Orphanage, organizing and helping to raise funds. By now, he had completed 9 one-act plays for Gertrude Lawrence and himself. And these were destined to tour the English provinces, the West End of London, Broadway, and practically every country in the world.
I loved playing film dirk. I loved playing Red Peppers. I hated playing The Astonished Heart. It depressed me. I loved playing Brief Encounter, but it was still life. And I liked playing We Were Dancing. But I always enjoyed acting with Gertie. And we certainly gave ourselves a basin for. There were 9 different parts to play in each 3 days. But it was very interesting, very exciting. Hands Across the Sea was absolutely straight. Yes, that was Lord Louis and Lady Louis Mountbatten. Because we used to give cocktail parties and people used to arrive whom nobody had ever heard of and sit about and go away again. Somebody Dick had met somewhere or Edwina had met somewhere. And as nobody knew who they were, we all talked among ourselves, and it was a very, very good basis for a light comedy.
I remember in 1906, Noel sent me 6 free tickets for the Phoenix Theatre. So Edwina and I went for the party. It wasn't until we got the second play, Hands Across the Sea, we knew why he'd sent the tickets. It was a barefaced parody of our lives. It was Gertie Lawrence playing Lady Marine Gilpin, and Noel Coward playing me as Commander Peter Gilpin. Absolutely outrageous, and certainly not worth 6 free tickets.
Brief Encounter was the one I suppose people remember. I remember Noel sending for me and reading me the play, and I was, as you can imagine, pretty delighted to be offered such a nice part. It's a wonderful part. And I really found the whole thing very different from any other film I'd done, because being in practically every shot, one got to know much more about filming. There's your train.
Yes, I know.
Oh, aren't you coming with us?
No, I go in the opposite direction. My practice is in Shirley.
Oh, I see.
I'm a general practitioner at the moment.
Dr. Harry's going out to Africa next week. Oh, how thrilling.
The train now arriving at platform 4 is the 5:40 for Shirley, Lee Green, and Langdon.
I must go. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I don't think it ever occurred to us that the film Brief Encounter was going to be, well, I suppose it's become in a way a sort of a classic. We just thought it was a nice, interesting film. And we were very lucky in that it was, well, A, Noel's script, and B, having David Lean directing.
But I couldn't. I wasn't brave enough. I should like to be able to say that it was the thought of you and the children that prevented me, but it wasn't. I had no thoughts at all. Only an overwhelming desire not to feel anything ever again. Not to be unhappy anymore. I turned and went back into the refreshment room.
One always thinks one could have done it better. One always thinks, never let me catch you doing that again. And you do. It's life, or filming or something. But I am grateful to Noel giving me the chance to film, because I don't think anybody else would have succeeded in doing so.
He completed a musical comedy operette for Peggy Wood and Fritzi Massari, but this, alas, was not the success that was hoped for, though it did include his now famous song, The Stately Homes of England.
Lord Elderly, Lord Boromir, Lord Sickert, and Lord Kemp. With every virtue, every grace, Ah, what avails the sceptred race? Here you see the four of us, and there are so many more of us eldest sons that must succeed. We know how Caesar conquered Gaul and how to whack a cricket ball. Apart from this, our education lacks coordination. Though we're young and tentative and rather representative science of a noble breed, we are the product of those homes serene and stately that only lately seem to have run to seed. The stately homes of England, how beautiful they stand, to prove the upper classes have still the upper hand. Though the fact that they have to be rebuilt and frequently mortgaged to the hilt is inclined to take the guilt off the gingerbread and certainly damp the fun of the eldest son. But still we won't be beaten, we'll scrimp and screw and save. The playing fields of Eton have made us frightfully brave. And though if the Van Dyke have to go and we pawn the Bechstein Grand, we'll stand by the stately homes of England.
War broke out, and Noel was sent officially to Paris. He was given the job in the British Information Service of setting up a bureau of propaganda in conjunction with the French Ministry of Information, then run by Jean Gielgud.
It was shrouded in absolute dead secrecy. The reason being, I think, that there was nothing of the least interest to be said about it. I think I ran a very efficient office, and I appeared at the office every morning at 9. We read through the monitors of the BBC. We discussed the war situation, had lunch, and that went on for about 6 months. And then I got sick of doing absolutely nothing, and said I must have some leave. I must go to America for 6 weeks to get my mind clear. And I went, and then, of course, bang, it went.
By the time he returned to Europe, via Lisbon, he found that the Germans had taken Holland, and he was luckily prevented from boarding the train to Paris, which arrived within 24 hours of Hitler and his troops taking German occupation. After the war, he discovered his name was amongst those on the Nazi blacklist for immediate extermination. He toured America with shows for British war effort, and after several meetings with President Roosevelt, was asked by the Australian and New Zealand governments to tour their countries with similar shows and broadcasts. It was now 2 years since he'd done any playwriting, and he left for Wales in search of inspiration with Joyce Carey as his companion and returned with a completed script of Blithe Spirit.
Oh, should we pick it up or leave it where it is?
Well, how the devil should I know?
There's no need to snap, isn't it?
I suppose we'd better pick it up.
Leave it where it is.
He started it on Sunday morning at 8:30 and finished it on the following Friday evening at 6:30. And it came clean off the typewriter and never had any alterations. 4 lines were cut, I think. There's never been such an extraordinary clean script. And it's a long play with long speeches, and it just flew. Blithe Spirit opened in this very theatre at the Piccadilly. Margaret Rutherford played Madame Arcati. Cecil Parker, Charles, Faye Compton was Ruth, and, of course, Kay Hammond, Elvira. And on the first night, there was an enormous bomb crater outside the theatre. And the quite smart audience, not dressed, of course, but wartime, had to pick its way over the bomb crater to get in, find the best comedy of the war.
He wrote a play to prove, at a moment of great danger to every individual English man and woman in England, how unimportant death was and how very like life it was.
The film of Blithe Spirit, Connie Cummings played Ruth, and Rex Harrison and Katie Hammond and Margaret Rutherford, of course, and I played the doctor's wife, Mrs. Bradman.
There must be a window open.
No, they're shut.
Perhaps it was one of those whatchamacallums Madame Arcati was talking about.
Elementals?
No, it couldn't be. She distinctly said it was the wrong time of the year for elementals.
Well, the old girl went pedaling off down the drive at a heck of a speed. Had a bit of trouble lighting her lamp.
Poor thing.
I've got a theory about her, you know. I believe she's completely sincere.
Charles, how could she be?
Well, we must be going. I've got to get up at Bonnetby early tomorrow. I have a patient being operated on in Canterbury.
It's been a thrilling evening. I shall never forget it. It was sweet of you to include us.
Good night, Mrs. Conlon. Thank you so much. You sure you won't have a drink before you go? Quite sure, thanks. I'm still a little reading up on the whole business, just for the fun of it.
We'll let you know if we find any poltergeists swirling about.
I should never forgive you if you didn't.
Come along, darling. Well, darling?
Well?
Would you say the evening had been profitable?
I suppose so.
What's the matter?
Matter?
Yes, you seem odd somehow. You feel quite well.
Fine. I think I'll have a drink. Do you want one?
No, thank you, dear.
Getting very chilly. Oh, my...
Charles. That was very clumsy, Charles, dear.
When he produced the play Cavalcade, we said it was time he did a cavalcade about the Navy, and I suggested he should do a film. Then came the war. I was given command of our newest and latest destroyer flotilla. My own ship was the Kelly. Noel came on board on several occasions, particularly after we'd had various disasters, like having been hit by a mine, hit by a torpedo, etc. He talked to the officers. He got to know the story of the ship reasonably well as we went along. And then, after we were sunk in May 1941 in the Battle of Crete, I met him at lunch, and he asked me to tell him the story of how we were sunk. I did this, and he was obviously very moved. Later on, he came to me and said he now had an idea for the naval film, provided I would agree that it should be about my ship, the Kelly. I was horrified and, of course, wouldn't agree at all. He said it must be about a ship that I know something about, but I don't know enough about the war at sea. It's got to be genuine. It can't be counterfeit. You can immediately detect it. I then agreed, provided it could not be traced back in any way to the Kelly, or, above all, to me.
The leader of this wave is coming much larger. You've probably hit our mark.
Well done. We've got him, but I'm afraid he's got us too. Midship.
Midship, sir.
Carry on firing. Here comes the next wave.
All guns are still in action, sir.
Stop both.
No answer from the engine room, sir. The telegraphs must be shot away.
I'm afraid we're going over. Pass the word to the hands on the guns. Cast loose the garlic rope. Abandon ship.
Before embarking on a troop show tour of the Middle East, Noel did a forces broadcast for the BBC, and one of the numbers in it was to cause a storm of controversy.
Don't let the peace be to the Germans when our victory is ultimately won. It was just those nasty Nazis who persuaded them to fight, and their Beethoven and Bach are really far worse than their bite. Let's be meek to them and turn the other cheek to them and try to bring out their latent sense of fun. Let's give them full air parity and treat the rest with charity, but don't let it eat me to the Hun.
During the war, Noel went all over the world entertaining the troops. And after a trip in the Middle East, he wrote a terrible book called Middle East Diary. And in it he described going into an American hospital which he said was full of sniveling little boys from Brooklyn. Well, this caused an understandable stir in the United States. And the Stars and Stripes, which was the American Forces newspaper, had a review of the book, and it said, headline, "Kick this bum out of the country." Now, on the day that the "Kick this bum out of the country" was being read by all the troops in Paris, which was indeed an American operation, Noel opened the Marigny Theatre with Maurice Chevalier, who the American soldiers were sure was a collaborator, and with Marlene Dietrich, who they were convinced was a German spy. Now, the third was Noel, "Kick this bum out of the country." And I was on leave from my unit up in Holland or somewhere, so I went to see this opening. And I went to see Noel before it, and I said, "You know, there are about 5,000 people out there, and I'm afraid they're all going to kill you. What are you going to do about it?" And Noel said, "First, I shall calm them, and then I will sing some of my very excellent songs." So I said, "Well, I'll stand by the exit, because, you know." So I went and stood at the back by the exit, and Noel came on to a deathly hush, which he's not used to a deathly hush. And then he looked at them, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, and all you dear, dear, sniveling little boys from Brooklyn." And they fell down and absolutely loved it. Now, Noel, I've known him for 35 years, thank God. And I know this about Noel, that if and when I finally do it, and I kill my mother-in-law, or I rape a nun, and I'm in the cooler forever, and everybody else will see fit to disown me, but Noel will come and see me every single day.
He's a marvelous sick visitor. I don't know whether people know that about him. What a very kind man he is in terms of visiting the sick. It's a thing that I myself found awfully difficult, a duty that sometimes I perform. But I'm afraid I make it seem like a duty, whereas Noel always makes it seem like a pleasure.
I was in hospital in Tripoli, and he came there to entertain the troops. It so happened that I was in a small ward with the adjutant of the Coldstream Guard. I was also we were in the same regiment. I'd been wounded in my left arm, and he'd lost his right arm. And a week after we'd been there, the matron came round and said that Noel Coward was going to entertain the troops. And she said, "But the one thing is that you must not get out of bed, because, I mean, you only been here a week." Well, the adjutant groaned with pleasure at the thought of not having to meet Noel Coward, and I was absolutely determined to go to this concert. So as soon as she'd left, I started preparing myself, because it took quite a long time getting along. And I went into Noel's room where he was washing, and he said, "What's the matter with you?" Because I was heavily swathed in bandages, and I said, "You know, I've lost my arm, and I shall never forget this, because I felt that he was much more moved than I was, and I think through the sort of liquid heat and the strain and seeing all these wounded people, and the fact that I knew him slightly, I got to know him very well later on, that I lost it. He was so deeply moved, I can't tell you."
By now the war was over, and the famous Drury Lane Theatre, restored after bomb damage, was ready to reopen its doors to the public. Noel wrote a musical, Pacific 1860, as a vehicle for Mary Martin and Graham Payne. But the expensive production, in spite of a charming musical score, was a great disappointment. This setback showed Noel the change in public taste for musicals, which Oklahoma, the next musical to open at that same theatre, was to establish with its new and exciting style and record-breaking run. Noel felt that he must make a fight to regain his rightful place in the West End.
Well, I was very lucky because I was asked to take over from Kay Hammond in Private Lives in 1946. It was the first revival since Noel had done it with Gertie Lawrence. And Noel directed us, which was wonderfully exciting for me because I was young, and it was a great chance for me in that marvelous part, a God-given part for a girl. And I felt that I was doing quite well, but my second act was good and third act was all right, but the first act, there was something wrong somewhere.
And I said to Noel, what's wrong, darling? Something is wrong. And he said, yes, my dear, tout plus elegant, tout plus elegant. And this was perfect, you see. This was just what I needed. I didn't want anybody to go into a long detail as to what was wrong with it. This was just the right thing to say to me.
Dependent on revivals, he returned to New York for a triumph with Tallulah Bankhead in Private Lives. He also directed the coast-to-coast revival of Tonight at 8:30, which lasted through the 1947-48 winter.
I went to America and had the luck to play with Gertrude Lawrence in a revival of Tonight at 8:30, which Noel directed. And in San Francisco, it was a lovely success on the coast, I lost my voice. Not soprano this time, but lyric baritone. But anyway, I lost it, and Noel went on for me and played for 2 or 3 performances, and that was the last time he played with Gertrude Lawrence, which is very sad.
I'll leave you never, love you forever. All our past sorrow redeeming. Try to make it true. Say you love me too. Someday I'll find you again.
When Sir Noel was writing Happy Breed and Present Laughter, it was the first time that I was really conscious of his tremendous concentration and dedication to his work and his self-discipline, because he was called very early in the morning, 6:30. And by 7:45, he was at his work table writing away and would stay there until 1 o'clock. I would go up at 11 with some coffee and go in, put it down quietly, and come out, not make sound. Some mornings he would say, "Oh, Coley, I'm so glad you come because I'm having a terrible time. Sit down, have some coffee, and let's talk about it." Then other mornings he would say, "Oh, Coley, I'm so glad you come because I'm so delighted with what I've done. I must read it to you." And, of course, that was a moment of jubilation. But the fact remains that he did, every day, follow that routine. So the image of him as a playboy and has been entirely forgotten. All engagements were cancelled in London until he got rid of this idea and had got it on paper and was pleased with it.
Well, the technique of writing comedy is absolutely indefinable, because you can be very surprised at a line that you don't think funny at all, so you get a belly laugh, and a line that you've been planning to rock the house with, dead silence. That often happens in comedy.
Miss Charlie, Miss Charlie, almost a garden wall. I want to wander for miles and miles, reels and smiles, out on the tiles with your shake, Miss Charlie.
He continued his battle for a major hit with a new musical in the West End, Ace at Clubs, but it failed dismally.
But on being attacked by the critics, Noel retorted, "I could learn from Olivier, from Gielgud, from Somerset Maugham, from the public, never from the critics."
I'm so terribly, terribly sorry for critics. They have to go to the damn theatre every night and see all sorts and kinds of nonsense. And I think their senses, if you'll forgive the phrase, get dulled. And I think that they suddenly will spring a surprise on you and come out and rave and roar and scream. And then, very often the play closes. My feelings about critical attacks have never been very strong, because I have been in the theatre too long. Unless I can pick out a hint, occasionally a good critic. Agate was a good critic. He once or twice said something or other that made me think, oh yes, I'm overplaying that bit. You know, you can pick here and there, but as a general rule, it plays a hit. And as I only played 3-month seasons, and with Goethe, and was always sold out for 3 months before we opened. It didn't matter very, very much.
Now came the London premiere of his new comedy, Relative Values. This was the first work in 4 years in which he scored the kind of success to which he had once been so much accustomed. It opened at the London Savoy Theatre with Gladys Cooper leading a brilliant cast.
Before we went into rehearsal, Noel wagged his finger at us all and said, "Now then, darlings, no books next Monday." I said, "What? No, what do you mean? Learn this part in a week and come up with..." I said, no, I'm much too old a dog to learn those new tricks. Certainly not. I like to hold my books the last minute. So anyhow, I did try that week, too, but it's not my way of learning. I like to hold on to my book and learn as I go along, learn the part and the words at the same time, you see. So, come the Monday, and we all started, and some of them did struggle, who had a shorter part to struggle with their... I didn't attempt to, I had to, you see. And I had an awful feeling that Noel was sitting out front, he was bored stiff with us all. He was only waiting for us to really get at it without our books in our hands.
Needing money badly after the failures of his last 3 expensive musicals, Noel took on a highly paid cabaret season at the Café de Paris in London in order to recoup himself. He scored an enormous success, finding in his appearances a new medium as raconteur and cabaret artist. He appeared in nightclubs in New York and Las Vegas, and later introduced Marlene Dietrich at her own memorable appearance at London's Café de Paris.
In tropical climes there are certain times of day when all the citizens retire to take their clothes off and perspire. It's one of those rules the greatest fools obey, because the sun is far too sultry and one must avoid its ultraviolet ray. The natives grieve when the white men leave their huts, because they're obviously, definitely nuts. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. The Japanese don't care to, the Chinese wouldn't dare to. Hindus and Argentines sleep firmly from 12 to 1, but Englishmen deter siesta. In the Philippines they have lovely screens to protect you from the glare. In the Malay states there are hats-like plates which the Britishers won't wear. At 12 noon the natives swoon and no further work is done, but mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun.
Cecil Beaton was now asked to do the scenery and dresses for Noel's next play, Quadrilled.
As soon as I started working with Noel, I felt that perhaps the visual sense isn't his strongest point. In fact, he's so talented that there are certain sides that really don't exist for him. I think that comfort is one. He doesn't really care at all about comfort. He doesn't mind what he eats, except humble pie, of course. But still, I respected his judgment, because he's nothing if not a professional. And as soon as we started working together, it was a question of really doing the best for the play. And I've never had a happier experience in the theatre.
The only really desperate thing that happened at Quadrille was that Lynn had a bustle. She'd been sitting on the sofa and a cushion caught on the bustle. And she was playing a scene with Joyce Carey. And she got up and the cushion bobbled. And there was a slight titter from the audience. And Joyce Carey, who was in a frenzy, tried to get at it and pursued Lynn, who evaded her. Lynn doesn't like being touched. And Joyce chased her right round the stage and finally had to go off because she had to make an exit anyway. And Lynn was left to do a little dance by herself with the cushion bobbling up and down. And she said to me afterwards, you know, that scene's never got so many laughs.
A great joy to sing his music, really, because I find that it's so operatic in quality. I think he's a great opera buff, and he tends to write with a slight slant of Massenet and Puccini. I think are possibly his favourite operatic composers. And I find that to sing his music in an operatic fashion is not difficult at all, because it's not easy music. I think people are led slightly astray. They think they're marvellous, simple tunes, but they're not simple to sing at all. And I find them rather wonderful.
Noel's mother, to whom he was so deeply devoted, died in July 1954 at the age of 91. This came as a great loss to him, leaving him no close relations. His theatrical disasters of the late 40s had left him with a bank overdraft of £19,000, and in order to pay his debts, he now accepted several film roles, in the first of which, Our Man in Havana, he starred with Sir Alec Guinness.
Arriba las manos.
Las manos.
Don't be too careful.
I've brought you back your umbrella. Sorry I'm late.
You've moved the lamp.
Oh, I was just looking around. You seem fond of Lamb's tales from Shakespeare.
One copy's for you.
Oh, but I don't read Lamb.
It's not meant for reading. Have you never heard of a book code?
As a matter of fact, no.
I keep one copy. All you have to do when you communicate with me is to indicate the page and the line where you begin the coding. You understand? Well, I'll explain in a minute. It's rather complicated and not very secure. You've got an electric kettle?
Yes, why?
For opening letters, of course. And plastic knitting needles. You'll want those. I brought you some ink.
I have plenty of ink.
Secret ink for communicating with your agents.
I haven't any agents.
Your first job is to recruit some. You run short of ink, you can always use bird droppings. Your code number is 59200-5. I, of course, am 59200. You will number your sub-agents 59200-5/1, and so on and so on. You get the idea?
I don't see how I can possibly be of any use to you.
You refuse to serve your country?
I didn't say that. It's just that, well, the vacuum cleaners take up time.
It's an excellent cover. Your profession has quite a natural air.
I find it terribly tedious making movies for one reason only. The rest of it I enjoy very much. But the tedious reason is you play a scene for the first time and the entire staff convulsion. And so then you have to do it another time for the sound, and then you do it another time because the mic hasn't been quite right or something's gone wrong. And by the time you get to doing the actual take, they're all going yawning and looking away and wishing they weren't there. That is not encouraging for light comedy.
All the same, his next role was also in a film, Surprise Package, with Yul Brynner.
Yes, it's really the incredible talent for friendship, because I think it is a talent. An intuitive, penetrating sense of what friendship is and what a friend may need. Knowledge by some miraculous, wireless, intuitive system of knowing when you are in trouble and when you need just what he always knew how to contribute, and still does, which is to make you laugh at yourself. And for that, I'm very grateful to him.
American earnings kept the wolf from the door, but did not entirely relieve his English tax burden. And his financial advisors suggested that he give up British domicile and take up permanent residence abroad. He was thus forced to choose between the England he loved so much and the chance of saving some money for his old age.
In order to try to recover his losses, he wrote South Sea Bubble for Vivian Leigh. Luckily, this proved a success in London, and he soon followed it with Nudes Violin, in which I played the lead, and I directed it also under Noel's supervision. But now, in his efforts to live up to his great successes, Bittersweet, Private Lives, and Tonight at 8:30, he had to compete with a new school of playwrights, John Osborne, Harold Pinter, Arnold Wesker, and many more. His own style was very individual, and less in tune with the times. It was therefore not surprising that Look After Lulu, his adaptation from the Feydeau farce Occupe-toi d'Amélie, failed to succeed, even though Vivian Leigh again played the leading part. And further disappointment followed when, after completing another new play, Waiting in the Wings, his old friend, the theatre manager, Binkie Beaumont, turned it down. Sir Michael Redgrave eventually presented it to the West End with an all-star cast which included Mary Lower and Dame Sybil Thorndike.
I was absolutely thrilled with it. It was a beautiful piece of characterization and so tender. That's where Noel is so wonderful. He's got this infinite tenderness. I think it was his devotion to old people. And he felt so desperately sorry for all those old girls in their home. Oh, I love that play. It's the most lovely modern play I've played, I think. Of course, when Noel was in front, we were all seized with, no, not nerves, but excitement. And I used to be frightfully excited when I knew he was in front, and every blessed time he was there, I dried up. I always had one bad dry when Noel was in front. And he came round after the first performance I gave when he was in front, and he said, "Fluffy Damesy." And Fluffy Damesy has been my name that has stuck to me from Noel. He always begins letters or telegrams, "Darling Fluffy," which is a shame because I'm not a fluffy actress, but always when he was in front, I fluffed. Wasn't it terrible?
Feeling he had lost touch with the British theatre-going public, Noel turned to American audiences for his next three musicals, Sail Away, and the Broadway production of Terence Rattigan's play The Sleeping Prince, for which he wrote the music and lyrics, then High Spirits, the musical version of Blithe Spirit, which he himself directed, starring Beatrice Lillie and Tammy Grimes. This was afterwards produced in London with a different cast, and was being played there at the same time as the National Theatre's revival of Hay Fever with Dame Edith Evans.
Of course, I enjoyed Hay Fever tremendously. I felt, which is one of his qualities, I felt it had been written now, and it was written a long time ago. I felt it was written for me, do you know? Because she was a delicious, silly woman, and I loved playing her. One always likes seeing Noel. One likes to hear of his successes. The other day on television, he was talking to a lot of people, and he's a wily old bird. He can get into 2 or 3 little words, just dripped out. Such a witty comment on the situation. He doesn't waste words. It's a style of his own, but it certainly is going on. It goes on through today. It is not dated, as so many of the good writers are.
In 1966, Noel suffered a most serious health setback when he contracted amoebic dysentery on a holiday in the isolated Seychelles Islands. In spite of this serious time of illness and anxiety, he insisted on honoring a promise that he had made to appear again in London. He had written 1 full-length and 2 one-act plays, the whole program entitled Suite in 3 Keys. And in this he played the lead with Irene Worth and Lilli Palmer.
He wasn't feeling well. And after the first 2 weeks, we went to London, another week. Irene and I felt we wanted to have another week at least. But Noel announced that as far as he was concerned, he was ready for the audience. And we were aghast because we said, we don't know our lines. And Noel said, but I do. Well, it was easy for him. He'd written them, you know. However, we opened. I was trembling from head to foot and breaking out in sweat because for me it was double jeopardy. It's not English not being my first language, but and comedy being such a very national thing, you see. You can cry in any language, but play comedy. Well, I needn't have worried because Noel was supreme master at the art of comedy, of handing or withholding a comedy line. Handed the cues to me on a platter. All I need to do is take it. You know? And I must say, all through the play, it was marvelous because to act with him, because he's such a wonderful professional. He gives you what is yours and he takes what is his, which is an actor's ideal heaven.
As you probably know, Noel Coward was always known in the theatre and indeed in the professional world that I belong to as the master. And when I was very, very young in this business, I couldn't understand why he was called the master. I knew, of course, he was a brilliant playwright and a brilliant actor, a brilliant writer of songs, etc., and a brilliant lyricist, and all the many things that he could do, but I still didn't see why he should be called the master, and perhaps some of the other more towering figures in the business should not also be called either second master or third master or something. Anyway, I was very young, and I just made my first success when you tend to become a little big-headed. And suddenly I was in New York, and I received a telephone call from Sir Noel asking me if I would do one day's work on a recording he was doing of conversation piece. And I said, of course, I'd be thrilled and delighted. And then an agent called me up and offered me $200 to do this particular program for the day. And I said, I don't work for $200. I mean, I get that a minute. I mean, $200, even if it is Noel Coward. I mean, it's quite absurd. No, I can't do it for $200. And put the phone down and felt very self-righteous. And about 10 minutes later, the phone rang, and a voice said, "You will do a conversation piece for $200, and you will like it." And I did it for $200.
London pride has been handed down to us. London pride is a flower that's free. London pride means our own dear town to us, and our pride it forever will be. Whoa, Liza, see the Costa barrels, the vegetable marrows, and the fruit piles high. Oh, Liza, little London sparrows, Covent Garden market where the costers cry. Cockney feet mark the beats of history. Every street sends a memory down. Nothing ever can quite replace the grace of London town.
Noel's 70th birthday celebrations began late in 1969, when the entire theatrical profession honored him at a charity midnight matinee in London in excerpts from many of his most famous works. And his knighthood was announced in the Queen's birthday honours list.
Getting a knighthood would be like getting a peerage or a delicious meal. Or the thing that excited is the career. There are rare occasions when you know, beyond a shadow of doubt, that you're doing it really well. That is very, very exciting.
Although the bad luck of ill health must have spoilt for him some of the enjoyment in the announcement of his knighthood and the tributes which it brought to him from all over the world, he could not have failed to be most deeply moved by the great celebrations at the Savoy Hotel and here in this theatre on the occasion of his 70th birthday. By the love showered on him by the whole acting profession, by the devotion of his friends, and the loyalty of his public all over the world.
The most I've had is just a talent to amuse. Hey-ho, here's love the world over.
These surely were his well-won rewards for the measureless delights he has given us over more than 50 years.
Sum it up. Well, and now comes the terrible decision as to whether to be calling or not. The real answer is one word. Love. Other answers can be jolly good company, filthy stories, anything you like, but the real answer is to know that you're among people whom you love and who love you. And that has made all the successes wonderful, much more wonderful than they'd have been anyway. And I don't think that there's anything more to be said on that. That's it.